Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. You're with a PTQ update. Spoiler alert, I did not win this. What you're seeing in front of you is the winning deck. But before we get on with that, let's just talk about my experience. I ended up going 5-3. Sorry if I sound a little bit pissy here. I just recorded an entire video and realized that my mic was not plugged in. So yeah, anyway, and then I have a long day driving. So anyway, I'm just gonna go over this as quick as possible again. I just spent like a good 20 minutes talking about it, and then yeah. Anyway, so I went 5-3. I was pretty impressed with the deck. The card that I was most impressed with was Rakdos's Return, as it did exactly what I thought it was gonna do and completely wrecked the control and the mono black lists. So one particular game that I remember was against Orzhov control, and I was able to first turn Elvish Mystic into second turn Rakdos Keyrune, and then actually I think I first turned Elvish Mystic into Domri, and then he was able to kill off my Domri, but then I was able to both Sylvan Caryatid and Rakdos Keyrune. I think it was either turn 4 or 5. I did a huge Rakdos's Return. I believe for 5, and got double Hero's Downfall, an Elspeth, and another removal spell, and a Blood Baron out of his hand. So completely just got rid of his hand. And yeah, and then I still had cards in my hand, he didn't, and my deck overwhelmed him. So again, against another mono blacklist, a Rakdos Return was the difference between winning and losing that game as well. So if you are going to be running any sort of black-red strategy, and especially I think I'm about reviving the Rakdos Devotion deck, I think Rakdos' Return is definitely worth putting even main board in that deck, because it affects so many decks. So the matchups that I lost against, I lost against an RG Monsters deck, which is kind of a mirror. He was using Domris and Sylvan Caryatids and Elvish Mystics, and so his mana was a little less clunky than mine, and he got the Domris both games, and I did not get the Domris both games, and I think that was the biggest difference between the losses. It was kind of a mirror match, so I didn't worry too much, or I didn't feel too badly about losing that matchup. But the other matchups I lost were kind of clunky. Like the other one was a Bant Kiora deck, and that one was pretty awkward. I crushed him first game with Stormbreath Dragons. I got the Godra, I believe, with the 1/3/5 Elvish Mystic into a Keyrune into a Stormbreath Dragon, and he had to answer all the Stormbreaths, and then I popped an Underworld Cerberus, and he had to kill the Underworld Cerberus, and I got all my Stormbreaths back. So that was that game. And then game number 2, I kept a 4-land hand and drew 4 lands, and it's hard to come back, especially against the Sphinx's Revelation deck. I just could not keep up the card advantage. And then game 3, I mulled to 6 and kept a 1-land hand with an Elvish Mystic and a Sylvan, I believe a Sylvan Caryatid was in there as well. So I'm like, okay, a 1-lander can get there. But he had a Last Breath, and I would kind of question the Last Breath edition, because the only card it can hit in my deck was an Elvish Mystic, but it did take out the Elvish Mystic, and I was pretty much screwed from there. I think it was 2 more turns before I hit a land drop. And again, you can't give Zori's control or any sort of Esper or Bant control that amount of time before they start chaining Sphinx's Revelation, and are just so far ahead of you. So that was my first loss, actually, and then my second loss was against I started the tournament 3-0, and then my second loss was against a deck that was kind of all in on tokens. He was running 4 main-boarded Rootborn Defenses and 4 main-boarded, I'm trying to think of the card where you prevent all damage, combat damage, and populate. And I was total noob the first game, because I played right into that, killed his Voice of Resurgence, and then he started populating every turn the Voice of Resurgence tokens and was able to beat me. So, and then I beat him in the following game, because I sided in Dreadbores and was able to successfully take out the key cards. And then third game, he had a 4th turn in Advent the Worm, and then just began to populate Advent the Worm tokens and strung in Flinching Courage on an Advent the Worm. And yeah, so against a deck like that, where I run no main boarded removal and just have a hard time in general, I mean, dealing with any sort of populate, it was a bad matchup. But I'm not too worried about facing decks like that, because the metagame is very hostile. Zori's Control is very hostile to that sort of strategy. So is Mono Black Devotion, and so are a lot of other decks. So, yep. And then some of the other matchups that I won. Again, I won some Zori's Control and Mono Black Devotion. I won a Boros Devotion, big Boros, and then I beat a Hexproof deck as well with the deck. So again, my deck performed 5-3. It performed pretty well, and I started the tournament out 3-0. So it was a bit of a bummer, But it is what it is. Did better than my last PTQ, so I'm hoping that I can improve on the next one and do even better. But anyway, enough about me. And oh yeah, and then it was also pretty cool because a lot of people recognized me, and I know I'm a local. I know that Epic Puzzles and Games, there was my old stomping grounds, and so I had a lot of my friends there. But there was a ton of people I didn't know from throughout the state that actually recognized me, and actually was able to sell some playmats there and talk to a few fans. That was awesome. That was great. I mean, usually a few people at an event. I think at Vegas. At Grand Prix Vegas, a few people, but that was 5,000 people, and I was sitting at the Gathering Magic table, so people could recognize me there. But anyway, only a few people at Vegas recognized me, and a few people at Fort Collins recognized me. But this tournament, I think there was like 8 people that came up and say, "Hey, are you Rogue Deck Builder?" and shook my hand and whatnot. So thank you. That made my night. That turned kind of a disappointing night into a great night, being able to interact with the fans. And I appreciate you guys, and I'm glad you appreciate my content. Sometimes I think I'm a joke, but you guys definitely keep me going. So thanks a lot. Thanks for making my day. Anyway, let's go on to the deck. This is the deck that actually took down a 192-man PTQ, the largest in Salt Lake City and Utah history. So again, Magic continues to grow leaps and bounds, and there was the sealed event. The last PTQ was the largest, I believe 160 something, and this one crushed that record, 192 for standard. And it was a very, very well run event. Big shout out to Epic Puzzles and Games. It went very smoothly. And the winner of this, his name is Ben, and I found out later on he's actually a fan of the channel. And he's running a deck that I'm very familiar with. It's kind of a hybrid between the Angry Phoenix and kind of a Red Deck Wins. And I think is an awesome metagame choice. So big shout out to Ben with his great call on deck to run. And the top 8 consisted of 2 Azorius controls that I know of. I think there was a couple mono black devotions, 1 mono blue devotion, and a RG Monsters that he faced in the finals. And this deck besides the mono blue, this deck crushes those decks. And I'll tell you about why I think that. And it was just a great call. According to Ben, his MVP here was Spark Trooper, because it usually got in there for 6 life. And it does have the Boros Charm Spark Trooper combo that can actually hit for 12. Double Strike Trample is huge. And then, Skullcracks are really good in this format against like Blood Barons, Grey Merchant, Sphinx's Revelations. And he said that Fire Drinker Satyr, which is a card I don't like because it's killed me so many times, but he kind of went a suicide strategy with Fire Drinker. He said this guy got in there some games for as high as 10 damage and did as much as 5 damage to him by the time that he ended up pumping him, and he just didn't worry about his life total. It was all about his opponent's life total, and he preferred him over Cackler. And it was interesting also, the Gorehouse Chainwalker. I preferably would put in Young Pyromancer. I think there's plenty of spells to make Young Pyromancer relevant in this deck and just a little more powerful than Chainwalker. But obviously, he's the one that won, and I'm going to try to get him on the channel. I'm going to try to have him explain his matchups and whatnot. But yep, so his early game was the Red Deck Win strategy of it was just the Fire Drinker Satyrs, Cacklers, and Chainwalkers. And then he kind of switched over to kind of the Angry Phoenix route with the Chanter's Phoenix that can recur after any one of these spells actually hits your opponent. And the Virus First Blade, and this card's actually awesome. A 4/4 for 3 mana, it becomes a 2/2. It's a 4/4 haste the turn it comes out, and then if it's a 2/2 after that, that's very, very strong in the format. And again, Spark Trooper is a great card again. A lot of times that they've either already wasted their removal on the early game, which maybe even got in there for 2/4 damage before they dealt with it with like a Bile Blight or a Doom Blade or a Hero's Downfall. And then you can get in there with the First Blades and the Spark Troopers and the Phoenixes to finish them off. A lot of times you can even bait out the removal for the Phoenixes and then get in there with these finishers here. So again, everything in this deck is probably trying to do a minimum of 4 damage, except for like the Skullcracks and except for the burn. But you're going to rely on probably, if you're going to get a turn 5 kill by each one of your creatures, to do at least 4 damage. So Chain of the Rocks is a great addition to it. It's one of the best removals in the format at the moment, as it can get rid of any sort of problematic card like Master of Waves and Desecration Demon, and both of those decks really have no way to deal with the Chain of the Rocks. So again, it's if you're going the Boros colors, this is usually an auto include in the deck, and I think it's great as a 4/of in the main board. Onto the sideboard, he's running Skullcracks again. This is probably for the Sphinx Revelation decks and the Grey Merchant decks. and again, it will stop their opponent from stabilizing. And then Toil Trouble, great card against control, especially with all that comes into play tap lands, makes your opponent so slow to empty their hands that you can trouble. And I've hit trouble for 7 damage before. That's very consistent. I would like to see some way to get the toil off, but that's probably too greedy. I mean, maybe these plains could be a temple, or one of these mountains could be a temple of malice. Who knows? I think I'd be greedy enough to do that. Oh yeah, and then again, Mutavaults are in here to do some damage as well. And again, I'm going to try to play this deck as soon as my buddy decides to give me my Mutavaults back on MTGO. I'm going to try this out and see how it works. And then the Satyr Fire Dancer, this is a very interesting card, as against any other sort of creature decks, it makes your spells 2 for 1 them, which is huge. And definitely think in this deck. Searing Blood's very funny with the if it does 2 damage to creature, then 3 damage to opponent, you can do 3 damage again to another creature. So you can have 3, like basically 3 for 1ing, because you're doing 3 damage to the controller. And let's see, Searing Blood deals 2 damage to our creature. How does this read? Yeah, okay, Satyr Fire Dancer deals damage. Okay, so it can't trigger again, is what I'm reading here. Anyway, then Boros Reckoner is a amazing card. This card is so great versus monsters, and actually pretty decent versus mono black, as if you're attacking in, they're not going to block you with a Desecration Demon or a Plukernos or an Arbor Colossus, as that's going to do 5 or 6 damage to their face just to kill a Reckoner. That's not a good trade. And so again, Boros Reckoner has just insane value in the sideboard. You can bring in as any creature deck, and yeah, they're gonna have a hard time dealing with it. I don't know if you'd bring it in as mono black, because it's just food for the Doom Blades and the Hero's Downfalls. But it definitely gets the monster matchup. This card is insane, and so I'm sure that did a lot of work in the monster matchup. And again, Searing Blood is a great card against any sort of creature strategy. It's a way to handle. I'm sure mono blue helps against mono blue, and monsters, I don't know if I'd bring it in as monsters, but you could actually use it in conjunction with Lightning Strike to kill off a creature and still deal some damage to your opponent. And I think that's pretty relevant with this deck. And the One of Electric, I'm sure, is in here for Soldier Pantheon decks, and like Boros Elite, Soldier Pantheon, kind of the mono white humans decks, as well as just a one of answer to Master of Waves, as at least it kills the tokens. So again, a great metagame call. I'm going to try to get Ben on the channel to talk about this if he can. And I don't think this is any sort of fluke. Like, Salt Lake is very competitive. We've had, at this tournament, looking around, I saw multiple people that have made top 8 in GPs. I've seen multiple people that have made the Pro Tour before. And there was the best of the Salt Lake crowd. Like I said, last PTQ season that we were in, I do remember the one that I won. In our top 8, 2 of the guys that I beat went on to win Boise's and Denver's. So we kind of had this monopoly of Utah players that went to the Pro Tour, as we took out Denver. We took out Colorado's, essentially, and Idaho's Pro Tour qualifier as well. So, yep. And again, it was 192 players. This is the largest PTQ, shattered the current record, or the record before that, which was 160 something, and largest event, PTQ event that Utah's ever had. So again, big shout out to Epic Puzzles Games for running a great tournament. I think they did a great job. This one ran a lot smoother than the ones in the past. Like I said, again, big shout out to Ben, because he's a very classy player. I watched a lot of his matchups of it. He seemed to be a very humble player too, which is refreshing in Salt Lake. And I don't want to get too much of a downer here and get too much hate from the locals, but I haven't had the greatest experiences in Salt Lake. My Pro Tour qualifier was a bit of a headache, as I think I've talked about this before. Again, I had at least 3 unpleasant opponents in that Pro Tour, and I've had our Pro Tour qualifier, and I've had some very unpleasant experiences, especially kind of growing as a player in Salt Lake City, going from a very amateur kitchen table player to a competitive player. I've had some very, very unpleasant experiences at like states and other like GP grinders and whatnot, where you've had some, like I said, some players that just really, really try to capitalize on new players. Very jerks too. And so I'm glad that a classy player won it. That's what I'm trying to say. And like I said, a few of my experiences, like, let's just talk about my Pro Tour qualifier, the one that I won. Round number 2 was especially frustrating, going up against a player that kept trying to play gotcha magic. What he was doing was he was path exiling my creatures, and then immediately when I would start to search for a land, he would then cast Aven Mind Sensor and be like, hey, I didn't pass priority. I'm calling it Judds because you're cheating. And basically trying to get me on searching my library for a basic land when he's, flashing an Aven Mind Sensor, not giving me priority back, which, that's fine. He should say that. He should say hold. He should say, I'm holding priority while he's casting his damn Path to Exile. But what really got me was then he was basically trying to say I was cheating, but it didn't even affect the game. Like, what we'd end up doing is I'd have to just go back and search the top 4 cards in my library, or 5 cards, whatever Aven Mind Sensor is. And if I didn't hit a Plains, then I didn't hit a Plains. But you shuffle the library anyway. It specifically says shuffle your library. So it doesn't affect the game whatsoever if I started looking at the bottom cards of my library. And he called the judge over once, and the judge just says, okay, just make sure you let him finish his Path to Exile. We can give you priority back before you start searching the library. So I'm like, okay. So he did it again, and at this point we were running out of time and we were trying to finish the game. And he did it again and cast Aven Mind Sensor, and I'd picked up my deck. And I hadn't even looked at the damn card. And he called a judge over and said, he's doing it again, he's cheating. And I'm like, I just had it at that point. I'm like, you know what? These type of players just drive me insane. That they're gonna try to beat you any way they can. They're gonna try to put you on tilt. They're gonna try to get in your head. They're gonna try to do whatever they can to get that win. And so that was a very unpleasant experience. And then at the finals was another unpleasant experience, but I didn't feel too badly because I just wanted Pro Tour qualifier. But my opponent too was kind of a tool, as I remember on my second turn, I'd cast a Soul Warden, and then my second turn, I cast. It was 2 in the morning, and mind you, I just got done with a matchup with a Soul Sisters Mirror, where my opponent was very classy. I mean, we were both so tired, and it was a Soul Sisters Mirror. You can only imagine how grindy that matchup is. I mean, the first game he ended up conceding because we did a deck count, and he had 19 cards and I had 22, and we figured he would mill himself before I would, because there was no way we would kill each other because we were both at 250 life with no way to kill each other. And so anyway, we just figured that, we were like keeping track of each other's life and triggers. I'm like, oh, you missed a trigger there, gain your life. And we were both very classy. And I went from a very classy game to a guy that on my second turn when I'm like, so I had a Soul Warden out, and I'm like, I cast another Soul Warden and a Sarah's Ascendant, and I gained 2 life. And he's like, no, you only gain 1 life. You missed your trigger. And I just gave him the stare like, you kidding me? But I ended up beating him 2-0 anyway, so that game wasn't the biggest deal. But still, players like that just irk me. So I didn't see much of that. None of my opponents were bad at this PTQ. All of them were extremely friendly, and it was extremely just awesome games. So kudos to my opponents. Kudos to everyone that came and said hi and made my day. Thank you. It was a great time. I was so disappointed starting out the day 3-0 and then dropping 3 games, then finishing 5-3. But all the fans made it, and all my friends, and especially the fans. That was awesome. Like usually, like I said, very few people recognize me at the events I've been to. But at Salt Lake, there was at least 8 people that I didn't know personally that came up and said, hey, I love the channel, or hey, I want, they shook my hand or bought a playmat or whatnot, or just talked to me. That was awesome. Thank you. Thanks guys for making my day. And big congratulations to Ben again. I mean, this is really about him for his awesome metagame call, for running this deck and being a very classy player. And again, we're going to try to get him on to do a deck tech of this. I'm going to try to run this list against the MTGO Gauntlet to see how well it does. And I'll probably noob it up compared to him. I mean, he's the one that won the PTQ with it, not me. But anyway, so had a great experience, had a lot of fun. This is what Magic's about. Magic's about having fun. Sometimes it's a very frustrating game. Sometimes you get those scenarios that, I've been to very unpleasant tournaments and very unpleasant experiences, but this was just all around, 5 stars, 2 thumbs up, great experience. Again, big shout out to Epic Puzzles and Games. Big shout out to everyone that played in the tournament. Big shout out to you guys, the fans, for making this possible and whatnot. And again, biggest shout out to Ben for taking down PTQ Salt Lake City with this awesome brew. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.